Morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be back in Kilkenny, and thanks very much to Liam for the invitation to speak. I know that you are all very familiar with the monuments of Bóinne, but I also know that those of us who love monuments love looking at nice pictures of them. So I thought I would start, especially for those people who may not have had an opportunity to visit Bóinne in a while, just to reintroduce the monuments to you. So, Bóinne is the name given to a complex of ancient monuments about, as you can see, 8 kilometres inland from Drogheda. The name Bóinne means palace or mansion of the Bóinne, and it is without doubt one of the most important archaeological landscapes, not only in Ireland but in the world. The area between Slane and Drogheda is where the River Bóinne takes a very distinct loop before it empties out into the sea, and it is within that bend of the river that we have these spectacular prehistoric monuments, notably the passage tombs, and the principal ones, of course, are Newgrange, Nath and Douth. As you know, passage tombs are found in other areas of Europe, but there is without doubt at Bóinne that they are the biggest and the best. And in recognition of the international importance of these monuments, Bóinne was declared a World Heritage Site in 1993. This map just illustrates, I suppose, the bend of the river. You can see that there's a river, a tributary of the River Bóinne to the north of the bend. So it must have seemed to the people who lived here 5,000 years ago that this area was naturally set apart. It's what Professor Frank Mitchell used to refer to as an inland island. And it must have seemed to the Neolithic people that the ancestors had chosen this area deliberately for their special monuments. Newgrange is the best known. It dates to around 3200 BC. Professor O'Kelly excavated Newgrange in the 1960s, early 70s. There's a curb of 97 curbstones at the base. The most impressive of the stones is the entrance stone. As you all know, Professor O'Kelly and his team restored the outside of Newgrange after the excavation. The quartz and the granite that's used at the monument is the original stone. The single chamber inside Newgrange covered with a corbelled roof, which is still watertight after 5,000 years. And of course the art is spectacular. This picture just shows Newgrange during excavation, and you can see that part of the monument is excavated, but even after all these years, what sometimes surprises some of our visitors is that Newgrange has not yet been completely excavated. About 1/3 of the monument is excavated. Not even all of the curb of Newgrange has been uncovered, which seems, when you think of the millions of visitors who have been there since it was rediscovered in 1699, an extraordinary thing. This is a picture of Professor O'Kelly, and his most notable find, as you all know, is I don't know if you can see it there, the opening above the doorway, the roof box. And we have a letter of Professor O'Kelly's as he started the excavations at Newgrange, and he thought it wouldn't be that interesting, the whole thing, but he says in the letter that it would give him an opportunity to learn more about the monuments of the Bóinne Valley. Remember, of course, he was Professor of Archaeology in Cork, and now if you ask any student with which archaeological investigation is Professor O'Kelly best known, or with which, and they will without doubt say Newgrange. And it was because of his rediscovery of the roof box. And it is through that opening that the sun shines at the winter solstice. And the picture here is taken by Alan Betson of the Irish Times, who I think has photographed more winter solstices than anybody else. But what the meaning was for the people who lived 5,000 years ago, we don't know. But it does seem significant that that the sun would penetrate that dark place at the time of its rebirth. So we like to think of it as a symbol of rebirth and promise and new hope. The passage tomb at Knowth is at the western end of Bóinne. The great mound of this most spectacular site contains two passage tombs, one facing east and the other facing west. It's surrounded by at least 18 smaller tombs, some of which predate the large monument. The great tombs, the eastern tomb and the western tomb, were rediscovered by Professor George Ogan in 1967 and 1968. The most spectacular find ever recovered from any passage tomb was found at Knowth, in Knowth East, and that is the flint mace head. And sometimes I think we see so many pictures of the mace head that we forget how small and how delicate it is. The great gift of Knowth, without any doubt, is the art. Stone after stone, calling out. I always think they're almost waving at us, calling out in this language that we no longer understand, but that we still appreciate its beauty. And the most remarkable aspect of Knowth is that people returned to it time after time after time. And probably the least well-known monument of Bóinne, large monument of Bóinne, is Douth. It has never been excavated, but like Knowth, it contains two passage tombs, although in this instance they're both facing west. It's similar in size to Newgrange and Knowth. It has 115 curbstones, and the smaller tomb is circular with just one side recess, and the larger Douth North is a cruciform tomb like Newgrange and like Knowth East. Douth faces sunset at winter solstice. You can see a photograph there taken through the gate, not even inside. And it always amazes me that the Irish name for Douth comes from Dubha, darkness. And yet, all through the winter, it's like has a fire going in it, because that alignment is not as particular as the one at Newgrange. So we can actually see sun in the south, Douth South, for quite a long period at sunset around winter time. Tourism is nothing new to the Bóinne Valley, as you can see from these pictures. They look like they're having quite the adventure, those two gentlemen. The monument was rediscovered in the 1699, but it was only really after the excavations of the 1960s and 1970s that mass tourism began. The second shot is from a newspaper article published in 1950, and you can see even then it was really busy with visitors. And my predecessor, you can see her there with her hat on her for the special occasion of the journalist coming to visit, Mrs. Hickey. She worked as a guide there for over 40 years. So I'm in a long tradition of people who stay at Newgrange for a long time. As time went on, though, problems developed. By the time the mid-1980s, we had severe problems at Newgrange. That's only 10 years after the excavations finished. There was uncontrolled access, more or less. There were huge numbers of people visiting the monument. We had terrible traffic congestion along the narrow country roads. There was litter problems. There was illegal trading, lots of red-haired girls in the summer playing the harps, and fellas selling out-of-date chocolate from the back of vans. And yeah, we had it all. We had security problems in that, cars were parked so far from the monument. They could have been parked a mile and a half away. They were parked so far, we couldn't keep an eye on them. And we had no facilities. So in the mid-1980s, the group got together and decided how to manage Newgrange and the other monuments of the Bóinne Valley going forward. Visitor numbers were limited from the mid-1980s, And Nowth, part of Nowth was opened in early 1901, and we started a guide service on the Hill of Tara, trying to take some of the pressure away from Newgrange. And the visitor centre, Bóinne Visitor Centre, opened in 1997, so it's 21 years open now. And for those of you who have been, I'm sure many of you have been, for perhaps some of you have not, but it's located on the south side it's located on the opposite side. It's on the north side of the river, and the monuments are on the south side. So to visit Newgrange and Nowth now, you have to come to the visitor centre. There is no direct access to the monuments, so everybody has to come to the visitor centre, and then you get a shuttle bus across to the monuments. It's a huge modern visitor centre, as those of you who visit, with a full-scale excavation. We even have an almost full-scale replica of the chamber of Newgrange in the visitor centre. It has cafes and shops and picnic areas and car parking. So it's a huge modern visitor centre. Before the visitor centre opened, though, there was a lot of controversy. And, just before I continue on to that, just to give you an idea of how many visitors we have now. In 2017, we had, as you can see, 284,000 visitors. Of those, approximately 160,000 went to Newgrange, 80,000 to Nowth. Nowth isn't open all year round, and the remainder to the visitor centre only. But as this is what I was going to say, before the visitor centre opened, it was very controversial, because the people who lived beside the monument felt that we, the government, were taking the monuments away from them, that we were taking the monuments and putting them on another side of the river. We were taking away what had belonged to them, that they had serviced the tourist industry for almost 300 years. And there were a lot of protests, a lot of concern. You see, to drive from Newgrange to the visitor centre is about 12 kilometres. But now if you were a crow and you could fly there, it would be only about a kilometre. So it's actually within sight, but it's a long way if you have to drive around. Some of you may have forgotten the controversies around the visitor centres at that time. Some of you have not. But the Bóinne Visitor Centre was only built after a Supreme Court ruling. So there we were in 1997 with a brand new visitor centre. And it looks so new in that picture. There are even poppies growing on the roof. We've never had that since. We were the envy of ancient monuments everywhere. We had a sustainable plan for the monuments going forward. The monuments, we felt, were safe. We could manage access to them going forward. But we were living in a community which was badly divided. And after the centre opened, I was very aware of the deep divisions and the resentment the whole campaign of building the visitor centre had caused. And I tentatively started to reach out to the local community. But where do you start? That's the thing. How do you start going back out to the people who have protested against its very being? So I'm very fortunate in that I trained to be a primary school teacher in the 1970s. And some of my friends from college just happened to be working in schools beside the monuments. And primary school teachers, for any of you who ever want to reach out to communities, are a great place to start, because they're interested in heritage, they're interested in education, and they're interested in the well-being of the community. So the first thing we did was we tried to develop an educational program with the local schools that could be used nationally. So when we developed an education program, we road tested it on our local children. Now think about this. Go back to your primary school. What would you think? Would you prefer a day in school doing maths and Irish and all the things that schoolwork involves, or a day out at national monuments where you are enjoying yourself. So you can see what happened there. The children started to have fun. We all started to have fun. The next thing, Tom Hodgins, who works in Knockcommon, said to me, could we hold the school play at Bóinne? Did I have to be asked twice? It was such a thrill to see the visitor centre full of Marys and Josephs and tea towels on your head and wise men and tinsel and everything you have yourself. But more important than having the children in were bringing the families, the mothers, the fathers, the grannies, all into the centre. And you know, for many, that was their first time in. And they looked around tentatively and they thought, it's not bad, might come back. The next thing we did was we invited our senior citizens who live close to the monuments in for Christmas parties. We've been doing this now for 20 years. It is now so successful that we have to have them over 2 separate days because we cannot accommodate the number of people who want to come on any one day, and our tea rooms seat 120. The big brainwave I had was to send the Bóinne buses out to collect our neighbours from their homes, because I don't know if any of you have older people in your lives, but one of the things that they really resent sometimes and find hard is having people on standby to collect them and pick them up and drop them back. So to have a Bóinne bus pick you up at your door and drive you home was a great bonus. The next thing we did was the craft in action. This is bringing local craft workers into the visitor centre. When the centre opened first, I had this idea that maybe I could stop the buses outside the craft shops and invite people in. But then our visitors began to think, gosh, this is a bit of a hard sell. You know, do I have to buy crafts? Do I have to get off the bus? Do I have to go into the shop? So rather than dropping people at the craft shops, we brought the craft workers into the centre, and it was a great success. Our craft workers are incredibly talented, and they are great ambassadors for the Boyne Valley. And from the point of view of a visitor, they can buy a craft and meet the craft worker, you know, like actually meet the person who made it. The art, we started having art exhibitions. The school art exhibitions were the best. Anybody who's ever had a student who did Leaving Cert art will know that every year there's a question on Newgrange. Now, if you're a teacher in an art school or a secondary school trying to teach children about the monuments, it's very hard to inspire them. They're just like, unless you come out to visit. But say I invited your school to put on an exhibition created by the children who are doing their Leaving Cert. You can see how that would focus people's attention. And the art these children have produced has been extraordinary. And the praise they have received from the visitors to the monument is also a great credit to them. And again, it brings the mums and the dads out. Next thing, this wasn't my idea, this was a neighbour's idea. Shay, one of our neighbours, said, how about having a shindig in the centre? And I just said, a what? Like, I didn't know the name Shindig, but for those of you who don't know the word Shindig, it means anything can happen. So there's not really a plan, you know, so it just depends on who turns up on the day, which seemed very loose to me, but I was prepared to go with it. And then I began to think, well, you know, St. Patrick is very associated with this area. So I got my people to talk to St. Patrick's people, and we got a loan of a St. Patrick's outfit from the Slane Parade Committee. And I'm not saying that Peter O'Brien, who works with me, has anything to do with St. Patrick. All I'll say is they're rarely seen in the room at the same time. But you can see him in that picture there with his glasses. He's giving out jelly snakes to the children. His tagline is, have a snake, I'm trying to get rid of them. And I know it still makes us laugh. So then it all started coming, the photography competitions, the talks in the evening, the nature walks, the rambles through the fields, the drawing lessons, the stargazing, and I have to say full praise to every archaeologist who has ever worked in the Bóinne Valley. They have always opened the dig to the public. And Geraldine and Matthew Stout were excavating this past summer, and Ian Doyle was just saying there how welcome they made everybody feel. And when the children from the local community want somewhere special to do something special, like become cubs or scouts, they come into Brúna Bóinne. And we have had so many art exhibitions. I thought when I started the art exhibitions that I might get a year out of it. Now it's non-stop. And we always try to include the youngest and the oldest members of our community. And we I almost forgot, we have a Brúna Bóinne football team. When I thought this was really when we began to think we've done something good here. When the football teams north and south of the river, neither of them had enough to make an under-12 team. So they combined and they called it the Brúna Bóinne football team. And when we won our medals, we came into the visitor centre for the presentation. And the biggest event of the year, and I know Liam's going to be shouting at me now, but this is the highlight of our year, is when the local children come into the centre to pick the winners for the winter solstice lottery. And every year I say to the children, where would you like the winners to come from? And they always say loyally, County Meath. But I know they're lying, because as soon as they pull out a winner from Australia, or has happened this year from Chile, the cheers, just great. I have to say a lot of the credit has to go to the staff of Brúna Bóinne for welcoming people in. They are open and friendly and encouraging, and they make people feel very welcome. They'll do a favour if they can, and then we find if the favour is done, the favour is returned. And just before I finish, I want to mention not only the local community, but what Loretta Guinan, who's Heritage Officer for County Meath, told me is called communities of interest, but what we like to refer to as our extended Brew family. And when I'm talking about our extended Brew family, I'm talking about all the archaeologists that help us out. I'm talking about the people who change the light bulbs in the monument, the people who manage our IT, our neighbours and our friends, the people who can bake cakes in the shape of Newgrange, writers, artists, poets, we have them all, and they all gather. And what makes them gather is not anything we do in the centre. It is an affection for and a connection with the monuments. And I'll finish there by just saying we have a great circle of friends. Thank you very much.